So here we are, last lecture of the public speaking unit, and it's the one I'm sure most of you have been waiting for, how to actually present your speech. And I know when I took public speaking as a freshman in college many years ago, I got into the class and I'm like, cool, let's talk about delivery. Yeah, that's what's important. And what I've learned, what I've truly come to believe is that delivery is important, but it's not the most important thing. And if you don't have any worthwhile content to deliver, you can deliver it as smoothly as you want to, but you're not going to make an impact on your audience. However, delivery is important. It's really important to being an effective public speaker, and that's what we're going to cover this week. It's that preview again. So make sure that you read chapter 13, read a little bit more about delivery, very useful stuff. Today we'll talk about managing and overcoming speech anxiety, which I know is going to be a factor for a lot of you. We'll talk about types of delivery. This will help you choose types of delivery you want to use when you're giving your speech. I'll give you some practical tips for practicing your speech. We'll talk about visual aids, and we'll talk about a few aspects of delivery that will make you a more understandable public speaker. Speech anxiety is simply a fact of everyday life. Everybody has some sort of speech anxiety, whether it's giving a speech in public or other situations. So when we talk about communication anxiety, there's two kinds. The first one is facilitative, and the second one is debilitative. So facilitative speech anxiety is that type of nerves that help us really think, perform at our best. Think about any athletic competition that you've participated in, or if you've been a musician or a performer. You get that anxiety before you go to perform or compete, but that anxiety kind of perks you up and gets you ready to do the thing. Debilitative speech anxiety is an intense level of anxiety, but it makes our performance worse. And there's a couple of ways that we can get that kind of anxiety. The first one is having a past negative experience. So if you've had a really negative experience with public speaking, no matter what that looks like, that anxiety is going to, persist into your next speech in this class. So having that previous negative experience is making you more anxious. But a lot of those previous negative experiences can be explained by irrational fears. So we have a couple of irrational fears here when it comes to public speaking. And the first one is of catastrophic failure. So this is, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. This could be fearing things like the power's going to go out or the internet's going to go out and everything is going to blow up in my face and I'm going to fail this speech because my internet cut out. And I want to assure you that that's not going to happen. Last spring when we were doing our speeches online, I had a student whose internet connection just dropped during his speech and we started over. We went to another student's speech. We had him jump back in. He finished his speech and he did well on it. So those kinds of fears of catastrophic failure can be made worse by our weird COVID-19 situation. But remember that those things are probably not going to happen. And if we do, we can deal with it. The second one I think is really important to talk about, and that's the fallacy of perfection. So that's thinking to yourself that if I don't give a perfect speech, I'm not going to get a good grade. I wish I counted the number of times in doing these lectures that I said, oh crap, or maybe something a little more severe, and stopped the recording and re-recorded it again. And as you listen to these lectures, you'll see that they're not pre-written out or rehearsed or anything like that. I'm just lecturing off the cuff like I would in class. I'm not going to go back and do it again and again and again and again to get it perfect because I'm human and you're human. You will not give a perfect speech because such a thing doesn't exist. There will be awkward pauses and bumps and, oh, I forgot what I was going to say, or it won't line up with exactly how you want it to go. And that's okay. You just have to keep moving through your content. I guarantee you, your audience probably isn't going to notice that, even if it seems really obvious to you. The third one is the fallacy of approval. So that's thinking that you have to get everybody's approval in the audience, and you don't. Because you're not going to make everybody in your audience happy, and it's irrational to expect that. You might give a speech on a topic that someone in the audience just doesn't like. So if somebody in my audience, my speech about kayaking is like, kayaking sucks, well, they're not going to like my speech, and that's fine. If somebody in the audience doesn't accept the scientific consensus of climate change, not going to like my speech. Okay. You're not going to get the approval of every single person in your audience. What matters is that you do your best, and what matters to me is that you follow the assignment requirements. See what I did there? And then we have our fallacy of overgeneralization, which is kind of similar to our catastrophic failure fallacy, but that's when we just blow the experience out of proportion. And we think, oh, I always forget what I'm going to say, or I never do well at speeches, or something like that. And when you start talking to yourself in that way, that doesn't help you perform at your best. Think back to that music performance, or that athletic competition. If you sit there before your baseball or your softball game and you think to yourself, damn, I really suck at laying down a bunt, when it comes time to lay down that bunt, you're not going to do well, because you've already talked yourself into thinking that you're not any good at it. So give yourselves a break. This is a new class, a new experience, a new person who has never graded you speaking in public before. Try it out and try to reframe some of these feelings that you might have into something realistic. So acknowledge what you're feeling. Acknowledge, wow, I'm feeling a lot of pressure to make sure that this speech is perfect, and then talk to yourself about that. Well, that's not realistic. Here's what I can do realistically to be a good public speaker. Some more ways to overcome that speech anxiety is to really use that nervousness to your advantage. So start thinking of it less as a, oh no, I shouldn't be nervous about giving a speech, and use that as an advantage to propel you to be in an aware state and to do well. Think about rational versus irrational fears. What's realistically going to happen to me in this classroom? Are people going to throw rotten tomatoes at me? No, they're not. Are people going to boo me off stage? No, it's a Comms 100 class. Think about what's rational versus irrational. And if you are giving your speech through WebEx, I want you to know that I'm here to treat you fairly. So if your connection drops, if you're having trouble with the screen share, if my audio or my connection drops, I'm here to treat you fairly and make sure that you get the opportunity to give the speech that you've earned. Maintain this kind of receiver orientation. So think about the people who are listening to your speech. It's going to be me, woo, and your Comms 100 classmates, and who are all in the same boat as you and having to give this speech. So remember that, they're on your side. Sometimes we think of public speaking as this adversarial relationship between the speaker and the audience, and it's not. People listen to a speech generally because they want to hear what the speaker has to say. Think about any conferences that you went to in high school, or maybe some conferences that you've gone to in college, or think of a professional context. I go to conferences for my full-time job, my professional career. I don't go there to pick an argument with the speaker. I go there to learn from the speaker, because the speaker knows more about the topic than I do. So maintain that receiver orientation and think about who your actual audience is and that they want you to do well. Keep a positive attitude. So the book talks about affirmations and visualizations, and these can be really helpful tools, even if you might think, oh, that's a little hokey. So an affirmation is just telling yourself some positive things about yourself. One thing that I like to do with public speaking, encourage my students to do, is to have what's called the growth mindset. The growth mindset means you know that you might struggle with something, but it's something that you can learn how to do. So for example, when I go to the gym and I lift, I am terrible. I feel like I am terrible. The overhead press, which is where you take the bar, you do that, and I struggle with it. So what I could tell myself is, wow, I am terrible at the overhead press. It's the worst lift ever. I hate it. Or I can tell myself, I have the skills to do well at the overhead press. And the only way I'm going to get better at the overhead press is to take cues from my coaches and also to press. That's a growth mindset. And that's an affirmation that I can give to myself to say, no, I'm not bad at this lift. I just need to keep doing it. Visualizations are about picturing yourself doing well at something. This is a great thing to do if you're like walking somewhere or just kind of not thinking too hard about, whatever you're doing right now. But just picture yourself standing up in front of the classroom doing well. And that could be picturing, in addition, maybe picturing yourself in your favorite outfit that you're going to wear to stand up in front of the class and do well. And then finally, just be prepared. One of the ways that we can overcome speech anxiety is to know that we have prepared for our speech. We know what to expect. We've checked the assignment requirements. If it's a bigger presentation in front of a group, we've got our slides. We know what we're going to do. It's just a matter of showing up and doing it. Every student that I have had has finished the informative speech. I've been doing this for close to 8 years now. I have had no vomits, no running out and leaving the room, no tears. Everybody makes it through it, and so will you. Next, let's talk about types of delivery. So types of delivery are the ways that you, as a speaker, prepare yourself and prepare your notes for the speech. What we are going to be doing in this class is called the extemporaneous speech. So an extemporaneous speech means from limited notes. It's a speech that is definitely prepared ahead of time, but it's delivered more spontaneously. So it's not, hey, I'm just going to show up and talk, not an impromptu speech, but you have your notes, but it's not going to be the same speech every time. It's got a little bit of a feel of spontaneity to it. And one of the cool things about an extemporaneous speech, as you get more comfortable with public speaking, is it'll allow you to kind of go off script a little bit in response to feedback that you're getting from your audience. Our second type of delivery is the impromptu delivery. So that's off the top of the head, no preparation. Where you're going to see a lot of impromptu delivery is in question and answer sessions. So somebody will ask you a question, you'll have to quickly come up with that impromptu answer off of the top of your head. Building your skills in other kinds of public speaking will make impromptu speaking a lot easier. So if you get comfortable in front of a group, if you get comfortable adding those transitions and those reviews and previews just kind of naturally as you speak, speaking impromptu is going to be a lot easier for you. Also, being prepared makes impromptu speaking a lot easier. Generally, when you're asked to speak impromptu, it'll be like that question and answer session, or it'll be something that you know a lot about. It's very rare to encounter a situation outside of a competitive speech tournament where somebody would say, like, hey, you, talk about this random thing. And I would never do that to you in this class because that wouldn't help you develop your skills. So, impromptu speech, top of the head, no preparation for what you're going to say, but by the virtue of what you know, you're all prepared to give an impromptu speech on a topic that you know about. Next, we have the memorized, or the manuscript speech and the memorized. We've got Dang. See, nobody's perfect. My video is covering up my slides. So let's try this again. We've got our manuscripted speech, which is something that's written out and read ahead of time. Clearly not what I'm doing right now. A manuscripted speech is fairly rare, and you'll see that in a commemorative occasion. So if you are giving a toast at a wedding or giving a eulogy, these would be really good occasions for a manuscripted speech. They don't offer the amount of extemporaneous audience interaction that an extemporaneous speech would or an impromptu speech would. It's really the words written out, ready to go. And that's really useful when you're doing those commemorative speeches, especially in an area where there's more emotion. Or, you're at a wedding, maybe you've had a few adult beverages, of course, only once you reach the age of 21. Nobody would do that under the age of 21. It's good to have that written out because nobody likes a rambling best man or maid of honor speech. That just sounds awful. Same with the eulogy, although, again, a different environment. And then you have the memorized speech. And memorization used to be a skill back 100 years ago that in a class like this, you would really drill hard. But memorized speeches aren't used that much anymore. So if you're going to give a speech, you're probably going to have that extemporaneous style to it. One exemption from that might be if you are running for political office or something like that, where you get asked kind of the same questions over and over and over again, and politicians will essentially memorize their answers to that question. Because if I go over here and I give my campaign speech and somebody asks me a question about healthcare, well, I'm going to have a prepared answer for that. And it's going to be, my answer on healthcare is going to be the same whether I'm talking to this group or this group or this group. I might make some changes, but that would be an area where you would memorize some pieces of information. So in our class, to summarize, you're going to be giving an extemporaneous speech from limited notes, an impromptu speech off the top of the head, no preparation, but it'll be something that you know about pretty well. Manuscript written out, read ahead of time for special occasions, and then the memorized speech, probably won't see that as much in your lifetime. It's really important to create good notes when you're giving an extemporaneous speech. So there's a couple of options here. You can use note cards like this. So this is a little 3x5 index card. Totally fine, definitely acceptable. Or you can have a piece of paper in front of you. And generally, if I'm lecturing from slides like this or speaking from slides, I'll print out my slides with the little 3 lines or the lines to the sides. So it'll be 3 slides and then the lines. And then I'll have that on a piece of paper and I'll lecture or speak from there. Make sure that your notes are large and easy to read, especially if you wear glasses. So if you wear glasses, you don't want to have to go all the way down here like this to see your notes. You want to be able to see them, depending on what your prescription is, underneath your glasses. So make sure that they're easy to read there. Highlight sources and other important information. So if you want to just highlight stuff real quick, you're like, oh, yep. Maybe you want to highlight where you transition or something like that. Don't go too crazy with the highlighter, because if you do, then everything's going to be highlighted, and when everything's highlighted, nothing is highlighted. So be smart about that. Put phrases on your notes, more than full sentences, but put a full sentence on there if you need to. So if you are going to give a full sentence quotation or statistic or something like that, put it down there. And then as you practice with your notes. So if you're practicing and you're like, oh, these notes don't work, or I can't see them, or I need more information here or less information here, you can go back and rewrite those notes or retype them and print them off again. And that's a great way to practice your speech and get more familiar with the content. Take a look at the notes for the sample speech on Blackboard, review them, and think about if notes like that would work for you. Maybe they're too much, maybe they're too little, maybe you prefer a piece of paper, but have a little conversation with yourself about what makes notes work well for you personally, which may be different than what works well for me. Now, let's talk about how to practice your speech. One of the common mistakes I see with new speakers is that they practice the introduction and the first point, and then their practice just kind of falls off. So you have this little half-drawn horse here. So we did, and this horse goes back to front, but whatever. We got our introduction here, we got our first point, and then the quality kind of drops off. So as you are practicing your speech, make sure that you practice the whole thing from front to back rather than just focusing on the beginning. I recommend that you learn the general structure and then you learn the details. So if you're practicing your speech, you learn first, okay, here's my main points, here's my transitions. And if somebody were to wake you up at 3 a.m, assuming you're not still awake, and they're like, what are the 3 points of your informative speech? You could tell them that. So that practice with that general structure and then kind of fill in those details and those subpoints of what goes here, what goes here, what goes here. And that'll help you if you get lost. So if you get lost or you drop your note cards or you just forget what you're going to say, okay, point 2 is this. I have to get back here. I can do that. Practice the wording of your transitions so that you're not stuck into this type of thing, or now that we've done this, let's do this. So you can change those up and that you're really confident in those transitions. Transitions can be a little awkward to say sometimes. They don't sound awkward to the listener. They might just feel awkward to you. So be prepared with those words ready to go. Practice with your visual aid. It's awkward to handle a visual aid sometimes, or you're not used to where do I click or those kinds of things, or how do I operate the screen share. So make sure you practice with that visual aid. Don't cram your practice. So when we cram the practice, again, we get this right here. We'll cram our practice into the day before the speech. So try to spread that out a little bit more. I also recommend that you practice for maybe 10 minutes, or something like that, rather than setting aside an hour to practice your speech. Because at that point, you're going to lose spontaneity, you're just going to get frustrated. So spread that out a little bit more. Maybe you can run through it in your head as you're walking to class or something like that. Know your first and your last lines. There's a few things that aren't more awkward than getting up in front of your audience and you're like, how do I start? Conversely, you don't want what I call the circling the drain conclusion. And the circling the drain conclusion is you standing up there knowing I have to have a good ending line for this, but I don't have one. So I'm going to circle the drain until I can find one. That's awkward too. So know your first and last lines, and then get a friend. You probably won't be able to practice with your friend face to face, but you can practice over WebEx. You can maybe practice social distancing, but have a friend listen to you. You listen to your friend. Give each other feedback. That's incredibly valuable for you as a speaker. And it's something that all speakers should do, no matter how experienced they are. Visual aids. So as a reminder, you need to have a visual aid in your speech. I'm going to talk through a few things to consider with all of these visual aids, but the book will give you a better overview of what they are and how you can use them effectively. Objects and models can be really great visual aids. Be careful with objects because you want to make sure that your object is appropriate for your audience. So an object can be too small for your audience to see. Let's say that I'm giving a speech on sock knitting. If I'm standing in front of a room like Songringer, where we are, that's not going to be an audience that's going to be able to see the actual sock that I'm knitting. In addition, you don't want to pass something like that around because it's very easy for a needle to fall out and then the sock would unravel, and that is a mess. So make sure that your object is appropriate. A model can also be really good. So you might have a model of whatever it is that you're talking about. This can be a little difficult to make, so make sure that it's appropriate for your speech, but also worth the time to put together. A diagram is really useful. So diagram is like a line drawing of the way that something's put together. Make sure it's accurate. Word and number charts. So I work for a business with a lot of MBAs, and they love word and number charts. But here's the deal. When you're giving a presentation, you want the visual aid to be an aid, not your presentation. So if you're going to show us a whole bunch of numbers, that's really overwhelming when it comes up on a slide. Same with a whole bunch of words. So that might be something that you simplify for your audience on the slide and then make the full chart accessible later. Just try not to overload your audience with too much information at once. Whiteboards can be really great for doodling, drawing, making diagrams on the fly. Whiteboards are really great when you're interacting with your audience. So one thing that I have done in the past is just have audience members shout things out, and I write them on the whiteboard, and then I'll draw lines and connect them to each other and those kinds of things. That's a little more challenging when we're on WebEx. So think about how you might use that. Handouts. Handouts are an underrated visual aid, and anytime a student makes a handout, I get very excited. Handouts are great when you want people to take information with them after the speech. Obviously, now we can't hand out physical pieces of paper, but you can definitely make a digital handout available. And I think a digital handout is actually a lot better because then you can direct people to links and other resources that are online. Like everything's online. So digital handout. A QR code can also be really great for this. If you're giving your speech and you're like, hey, go fill this out. Boom, here's a QR code. Everybody can get out their phones and get engaged with that. If you're giving a handout out in a physical room, when or if that happens again, make sure that you are conscious of when you hand that out. If you hand people a piece of paper, they're going to read it, and it's going to distract them from your presentation. Similarly, if you are giving a talk about a sensitive topic, make sure that you just hand a handout out to everybody. There's, let's say that you're giving a topic about food insecurity in college students, and you have a handout with a list of resources for food insecurity in the Madison area, and you plop that handout up front, and you're like, hey, if you're food insecure, come grab a handout. That outs people as being food insecure, and they might not want to share that. Give the handout to everybody. Slide decks are the visual aid that most of you will choose. This is the new name for PowerPoint because some MBAs have decided that slide deck is what we're going to call it now instead of a PowerPoint. Ooh. If you are going to use a PowerPoint, make sure that you run the show, not the slides. So the PowerPoint's there just to help you show the things that you want to show. It's not the star of the show, you are. Videos and audio clips, these can be really great visual aids. Make sure that you're comfortable with the technology. Make sure that the video is loaded and ready to go, especially if it's a YouTube video and you're like, oh, well, I want to start 2 minutes and 30 seconds in. Be prepared for advertisements. Same with audio clips, although those are likely to have fewer advertisements on them than our friends at YouTube, who make their living based on selling us ads. So those are your visual aids. Book goes into a little more detail about what they are, but I wanted to give you some tips for how to use them practically in the real world. So the book offers 5 rules for visual aids, and I think these are great. I'm going to talk you through these rules and then talk about some ways that people will maybe make mistakes with them. The first one is to keep it simple. So if you put a bunch of text in front of people or a bunch of diagrams, they're going to tune out what you're saying and tune into the diagrams, or they're going to be like, whoa, no, too much, over my head, I'm out, or they'll just get frustrated. So make sure that the visual aid is simple enough to support your presentation without being a little extra. The company that I work for has some people that love to put up complex diagrams about how our product works and what our product strategy is during the PowerPoint presentations. And people that work at the company have seen these over and over and over again. They make a lot of sense. They're like, cool, oh yeah, it's that flywheel diagram again. Cool. But I've worked there for 2 weeks, and every time I see one of these things, 1, it's complicated and I don't fully understand how the product works. 2, it distracts me from what the speaker is saying. And 3, it kind of makes me feel dumb. So keep your visual aids as simple as you can. Second, consider the size. So this will generally apply to things that you have to bring with you. Make sure that those are a good size. But you also want to consider just how much room it takes up in your presentation and how much that visual aid takes away from you. 3, make your visual aids attractive and professional. Again, neatness counts. Don't have things that are weird font sizes or not lined up or Comic Sans or anything like that. Make it look good, because that visual aid is an extension of you as a speaker. We'll talk about elements of delivery on the next slide, and appearance is one of those elements of delivery. Your visual aid speaks for you. With you, make sure it looks good. Keep your visual aids appropriate. That includes a couple of things. 1, make sure that the visual aid is relevant to what you're talking about. Look, I love puppies just as much as anybody else, and I would love to see a picture of your puppy. But unless you're talking about puppies in your speech, putting a puppy on your visual aid is going to be really distracting. Similarly, you want to make sure that your visual aids are appropriate for the audience. So I'm not one to shy away from challenging topics. And as we get later in the semester, we'll do some readings about some challenging topics. We'll confront some profanity. And it'll be relevant to what we're talking about in class. But if you're talking to a younger group, or if you're talking to a group where those kinds of words and language would be really inappropriate, make sure that you're not including those things. If you're going to include graphic images on your visual aid, think to yourself, well, is this appropriate? Is this going to help explain my topic? And then give us a warning. So if you were to talk about foot diseases, for example, for your informative speech, and you're going to show a picture of some foot disease, you might want to let the audience know so that they're not like, oh, God, what's that, when it comes up, and they can look away if that's not something that they want to see. So keep your visual aids appropriate, and then be in control of the visual aids. So this means just knowing how they work. Don't be like, oh yeah, I've never used a slide deck before. Here we go. I don't know what I'm doing. Make sure that you know how your animations work, how your transitions work. If you're going to be screen sharing, practice screen sharing ahead of time. Just understand how the visual aids work. Most important thing you need to know about visual aids is that they are aids. They support the speaker. They don't give the speech for them. You are the one giving the speech. The visual aid supports you. Let's talk about some aspects of delivery that affect the way that your audience perceives you. Let's first talk about visual aspects. Top of the list is appearance. So your appearance is the first thing that we see about you as a speaker. And some of you might be like, cool, got it. And others of you might be really uncomfortable about that. You feel judged for your appearance. There are certain aspects of your life that may make you feel like you're judged for your appearance more, whether it's race or gender or sexuality. Here's what I'm going to tell you about appearance. You have to feel good about what you're wearing. So dig through your closet, find the thing that makes you happy, put it on, wear it to class. Unless it's a prom dress, then maybe don't. Or pajamas or something like that. You know what I mean. But find a piece of clothing that really makes you feel good. If you have longer hair, make sure that your hair gets out of your face, because there's nothing more annoying than watching this during a speech, and then the person's constantly going like this. So tie it back, pin it back if it's really long. If you fidget with your clothing, make sure that you don't have any clothing in the area to fidget with. Keep your hands out of your pockets. If you fidget with like a watch or something like that, take it off. And then pick something that makes you feel good about yourself. And that's really all I'm going to say about appearance, because a lot of the social standards, well, I don't want to record myself saying how I feel about them. Come to office hours. I'll give you the tea. Next one is your movement. So movement can be a lot of different things. As you're talking in a bigger space, you might move through that space. Here I am in a pretty small space, my home office. I'm not going to move around that much. Your movement can also be how you would shift from foot to foot like this, moving back and forth. And that can be part of your posture as well. So your posture is basically standing up straight. If you are hunched over like this or like this, it might look a little awkward to your audience. So just kind of shoulders back, stand up straight. Some of you might not be able to do that due to a disability. And in that case, there is nothing wrong with you. But if you are able to just really stand up straight and present in this kind of way, you're going to feel a lot better as you do that. Facial expression. So this is a really hard one right now when we're all wearing masks. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why I prefer to record lectures and play them for you when I'm at home, rather than like trying to lecture in front of a group of people in a mask. It's so hard to have a facial expression that really shows through. One thing you can definitely do is continue to smile underneath your mask, because that's going to come up through the rest of your face and show how you feel and how you're interacting with the people around you. You can also compensate by using different gestures and those kinds of things to share your enthusiasm for the topic. But for right now, we're just going to make do with what we have. And if your smile is under your mask, well, people should be able to see it through your eyes and through your words. And then eye contact. So eye contact is something people kind of struggle with. You make a little bit of eye contact with the people in the audience, just boop, 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 move it around. And don't do the look above the audience. That's really awkward. Don't do the look at the back of the room thing. Just look people in the eye and move on. If you are presenting on WebEx, try to make eye contact with the webcam in your computer. And then one thing that could be really helpful is just to minimize your own video so you're not stuck looking at yourself wondering, oh, do I look okay? Am I doing this right? Make that eye contact with the computer. Auditory aspects of delivery are in how we talk verbally. So you've got your volume. This is how loud or soft you're talking. Make sure that you're talking at a volume that's going to work. When you're giving your speech in class in a mask, you're going to have to speak louder than you would if you weren't wearing a mask. So make sure that you are prepared for that. And in fact, I recommend that you practice with the mask on at least once so you're comfortable with it. Rate is how fast or slow you speak. People will tend to either speed up or slow down when they get nervous. I actually slow down when I get nervous. So everybody's a little different there. You might, again, want to slow down if you're in a mask because it'll be harder for people to hear you. You might also want to slow down if you're online too, in case there's a little lag in the connection. Pitch is how high or low your voice is. People get a higher pitch in their voice when they're excited, take a lower pitch when they want to be serious. As you start speaking more, you'll learn to play with the pitch in your voice. And then articulation is making sure that you say all of the parts of words and just being very clear and enunciating what you're saying. And again, hugely important when you're wearing a mask to make sure that you can hear, that you say every piece of the words so that it's easier for your audience to understand you. Those are our aspects of delivery. Basically, practice, keep these things in mind, and if you're working with a friend, maybe pick one or two of these things that are strategic for them to work on. I want to take the second to last slide of this voice thread to talk to you about a few public speaking pet peeves that I have. Everybody's got their own pet peeves, but these are mine. First one, using a visual aid when it's unnecessary. There is visual aid required for your informative speech, so you do get used to using them, but they're not always necessary. You can talk for 10 minutes without a visual aid, and it's okay. You don't always need to have a slide deck. So make sure that that slide deck is necessary if you're going to use it. The next one, too many words on a slide. Honestly, the slides that I use for lecturing have too many words on them if I was going to be giving a speech. I put this many words on the slide on my lecture slide decks so that you can use them as your own notes. But generally, you don't need this many words on a slide. I really like just sometimes if I'm giving a presentation, I'll just have a picture on the slide and I'll talk about the picture or the graph or the chart, and I won't have all of these words. I don't want you to come up here and give your speech and have a slide and a bullet point for every subpoint on your outline. Imagine if I did that with the Lake Superior speech. I think it would be more boring to listen to because you're not actually listening to the speaker. You're just kind of like, oh yeah, here's the speaker's outline and this is what they're saying and it matches. And frankly, if you want to sit there and listen to speakers and see if their points match their outline, go to graduate school, get a master's degree in communication, and go teach some basic comm classes because that's what I do. But that's not what I want to do when I'm listening to a speaker. Not practicing with the visual aid. The visual aid is, again, there to support you as the speaker. Practice with it. Become one with the visual aid. Use it. Long introductions, you don't need a long introduction. Get to your introduction, get to the main point, move on with it. If you feel like you have to cover so much background material in your introduction that you won't be able to get to your first main point for 2 minutes into the speech, you have some information in your introduction that needs to move to your main point. That's what I found with the Lake Superior speech. I had all of these things that I wanted to tell you about Lake Superior, and I was like, whoa, this is going to be a 3-minute introduction. These things actually need to be a body point. Finally, going over time. We have a time limit in this class for your speeches of 5 to 7 minutes. That gives us enough time to get 6 speeches in per class period. I have another class, for a 4 o'clock class, I have another class that comes in at 5 o'clock. So there needs to be enough time for all of the 4 o'clock students to get out and the 5 o'clock students to get in a socially distanced way. If you are a speaker and you take up 12 minutes instead of 7 minutes, that puts everybody else late because you've taken up other people's time. If you're doing this in a business context, people generally have other meetings or presentations or places to be. If you're going to a conference and you take up 45 minutes and you're only scheduled for half an hour, that puts the conference off of schedule. So be respectful of other people's time and really practice to meet the time limit. And that might mean that you don't get to talk about everything that you want to talk about or tell all of your witty jokes. And I know that stinks because I have a lot of witty jokes that I would like to tell, but I don't have time. So respect the time limit, respect other people's time. And in this class, I will cut you off at 7 minutes and 30 seconds, and I will do it verbally and I will do it loudly. You will be done because we need to have time for every student to give their speech. Those are my pet peeves about public speaking. We will discuss time limits again in our reading, so take what I had to say about time limits, keep that in the back of your mind as you go on to our reading, and by reading, I mean podcast. Finally, I encourage you to look at the sample speech or another speech of your choosing and evaluate the visual and auditory components of delivery. Think about how those affected your understanding of the speech, whether it's a sample or another speech. Think about the visual aids that were used. Were they sufficient? Would you suggest any changes? And with that, you've made it through Unit 1. So stop and give yourself a round of applause. I know with all of this information, you have the tools to write a really awesome speech. And over the next 3 weeks, I am so looking forward to hearing them.